All right. Well, hello everyone. My name is Rachel Eve Stein and I work at Solar One. Welcome to Clean Energy Connections, a creation of Solar One and Acre in partnership with Greentech Media. I was the downstate program manager for NYSERDA's Economic Development Growth Extension Program, as you might know it, EDGE. Shortly, I will continue my role managing NYSERDA program outreach for New York City and Long Island under the Clean Energy Communities Program. This event has been a cornerstone of our outreach to the cleantech community, and we're happy that NYSERDA, under the Clean Energy Fund, will continue to support events like these. Always a good round of applause for NYSERDA. They've really been with us since the beginning. And tonight we welcome the Energy Gang again for a candid take on the clean energy transition. This is the second of 4 panels that will be held throughout the year, focusing on next generation energy. The electric power industry is entering a new phase in its evolution. The emergence of distributed energy resources on the grid, once seen as a challenge to utilities, is opening up new revenue streams for technology vendors, private sector service providers, and utilities. The 4 events all highlight the stakeholders and technologies driving this evolution. Before we kick off the event, I always like to do this. I want to get a show of hands for how many people are attending Clean EC for the first time. Wow. Okay, that's great. Every single time I go, wow. But really, it's wonderful that we have so many new people. And welcome. Congrats to those who managed to fit in the room. It's good when we have to consult the fire code when scheduling events. So just quick event logistics. Greentech Media is live streaming this event. So if you need to get up, please avoid the cameras. Sorry, but the bar is closed during the event and will reopen after the event for networking. If you are holding any bottles, please be careful with them. They do make a lot of noise when they drop. And of course, cell phones on mute. For the in-person audience members here, this is an interactive discussion. So if you want to ask the panel questions, you can do the following. Those of you here with us in the studio can write your questions on those index cards we were handing out front. And there will be a card runner walking around, creeping in the aisles, picking up cards, and that would be Eamon. Eamon, where are you at? Eamon's in the back right now waving. He'll be there. You can raise your hand a little. He'll come and get your card. You can also tweet your questions all over America, here, wherever you are, to our handle, our Twitter handle, at CleanECNYC. And we'll be live tweeting the event, of course, throughout, so you want to follow that. And our hashtag is clean, and the letters NRGX. And if you're in person, you can also tweet those questions. So one more shout out to our sponsors and partners, NYSERDA, and of course the New York City Economic Development Corporation, EDC. And now I'm going to introduce Micah Koch of NYSERDA, and he's also one of the co-founders of the Clean Energy Connections event series. So thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. All right. Thank you. All right, how you guys feeling? You're going to have to do a little bit better than that. How you feeling, New York City? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. We need some energy. It is the Energy Gang. They are making their return to the WNYC green space, so we had to up the voltage a little bit. We're really excited that the Energy Gang is back in the WNYC green space, and this conversation on getting their thoughts on this clean energy transition, I think, is going to be really interesting. I think we're just at a really critical moment in time with everything that's been happening in kind of the business world, but also in the policy world. And so I'm super excited to hear what they have to say and what our great guests have to say. It's been a really volatile year since we hosted them here last time, if you were here last time. And I just wanted to share, before we bring them out, I just wanted to share kind of 3 somewhat personal developments that give me some reason for hope and optimism that we're headed in the right direction, even though we're in the midst of this transition. So the first is that 2 weeks ago, the utilities in New York and 3 solar companies created this Solar Progress partnership, through which they proposed a business model that could replace net metering and address cost-shifting concerns. And I think this is really interesting. If anyone's read it, I think this is a pact that could serve as a national model. And really what New York is attempting to do with this unique approach towards net metering is really a better compromise than what we've seen in a lot of other states like solar-rich Nevada, which is incredibly ironic. But it really does not shy from utilities' dislike of net metering, but it also serves a way to bolster community solar plans, which is just driving incredible growth here in New York, and which utilities across the U.S. are exploring. And just to give you a sense, in Central Hudson, which is one of our smaller utilities just north of here, they have a minimum load of about 1,200 megawatts. They've received applications for about 700 megawatts of community distributed generation. So you can do the math, but there's tremendous interest there. The second reason for optimism is that last week I joined a group of elected and state officials, environmental leaders, business people, and a whole bunch of engaged citizens to celebrate the launch of New York's first community choice aggregation program. And the announcement so there was an announcement. It deserves a better round of applause than that, but you can wait until I'm done. So PSC Chair Audrey Zibelman, who graced the stage here at Clean Energy Connections, made the announcement that CCA is actually going to become a statewide program. And that's really exciting because that's a policy that enables municipalities to aggregate electricity demand and then buy bulk power on behalf of their community, with the intent to procure alternative energy supplies while maintaining their existing electricity providers for transmission and distribution services. The reason why it's particularly exciting in Westchester is because approximately 110,000 residents and small businesses in Westchester, which is a pretty conservative part of the state, will actually see lower electricity costs, with 14 of the 20 towns selecting 100% renewable energy as their default energy supply. And not only are these towns choosing renewables, but they're also looking at aggregating for demand response and also exploring building local clean generation. So that's actually happening. And then the third reason why I'm optimistic is because we just launched Stage 2 of New York Prize, which is our community microgrid competition and the initiative that I run at NYSERDA. In Stage 1, we funded 83 feasibility studies across really every single area of the state, in urban locations and rural locations and suburban locations. And communities actually now have access to real meaningful data on the costs and the benefits of building out these local microgrids to provide clean, reliable power in the event of emergencies. And a lot of them actually made real progress in terms of identifying partners, and these partners are multinational corporations in some cases who are coming from all around the world to help design and build these critical systems. And I can tell you this morning I was with 9 of them who have projects here in New York City. They are really, really compelling projects, and we're going to put all of these final feasibility studies that they've done online so that they're publicly accessible. And we look forward to seeing what comes next when applications are due for Stage 2 on October 12th of this year. Now I have the great honor of actually introducing my former colleague, Kurt Becker, who's the Vice Dean for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the NYU Tannen School of Engineering. Kurt is a really interesting guy. He's actually an international expert in the areas of experimental and theoretical study of electron-driven processes in plasma. So for all of you plasma geeks, you'll want to talk to Kurt afterwards. He's also the recipient of the Dr. Edward Martin Prize for Excellence in Research. He's a fellow at the American Physical Society, and he's also a recipient of the Thomas Alva Edison Patent Award, which I had to mention tonight. But Kurt also really has been a longtime champion of clean energy entrepreneurship and research commercialization. So please help me bring Kurt to the stage.
All right, I'm so excited to be here and host Saturday Night Live. Wrong show. Tune in Saturday. That will be the other show. I'm here to represent one of the partners of this event, the Urban Future Lab at NYU School of Engineering, and ACRE, New York City's first cleantech incubator. What the incubator does, it nurtures companies between seed and Series A financing, and much of its earlier success was really due to my car, who played a pivotal role in getting it to where it is. I'm really standing in for my boss, Pat Zappensley, who happens to be in California attending Tesla's innovation conference. Sunshine, California, rain in New York. I can't really blame her. I want to draw your attention to one thing. The Urban Future Lab and Acre will launch a competition in the middle of June trying to attract cleantech startup companies from across the United States to New York State, New York City, and into our cleantech incubator Acre. Not necessarily in that order, but we like the best and brightest from across the country to come to New York. So look at our website, ufl.nyc, after June 15th, and you will see the announcement of the competition, the criteria, and the prizes. With that, welcome again. We got a great show for you. The gang is here. Good night.
All right, so we were just in a room back there talking for the last hour, and then they came in, opened the door, whisked us down a nondescript hallway, sent us through an unmarked door, and the lights are blaring. It's a little hard to see. So maybe you can help us out. I'm not really sure where we are at this point. Are there any fans of the Energy Gang podcast in this room? All right, good. So we're in the right place. With that out of the way, this is the Energy Gang from Greentech Media, and this week we are live at WNYC's Green Space in Lower Manhattan. I'm Stephen Lacey, a managing editor with Greentech Media. Welcome. Thank you all very much for being here. We've got a good lineup for you. We're really excited to be here. We love this venue, and we love getting together in a live setting. So we've got the regular gang here and a couple folks that we're going to initiate in front of a live studio audience, and we'll see how they do here. Let me introduce my regular co-hosts. Katherine Hamilton is the co-founder and a partner at 38 North Solutions. She's based in Washington, D.C. She is our resident policy expert, and despite talking to politicians all day and spending most of her time on Capitol Hill, she's our resident optimist, which I still haven't figured out. How are you?
I haven't figured that out either, but thank you.
Well, it rubs
it's really
off.
Great to be here.
Jigar Shah is on his home turf. He's based here in New York City. He's the president of Generate Capital. He is our resident business model innovation expert, our finance expert, and the most strong-headed of the group. Jigar, how are you?
I love being in my hometown.
Absolutely. Let's welcome our two guests this week. Yuliya Chernova is a reporter with the Wall Street Journal. She covers startups, venture capital for the Venture Wire, and she covers a lot of different industries, and with energy and clean tech being a part of her reporting. Hey, Yuliya.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And Chris Martin is a reporter here in New York as well with Bloomberg. He also covers energy and clean tech. Chris, how are you? Covering a lot of different businesses in the space. A lot on SunEdison recently. Do you have SunEdison burnout?
Yes, glad to be here though, thank you.
So I hope you don't have SunEdison burnout, because we are going to talk about that company as part of our first
Some friends of mine were going to play a drinking game tonight about how many times we mentioned SunEdison, and I was going to tell them, no, just once.
Yeah,
They're done.
Yeah,
I hope they're drinking Budweiser.
Yeah. Hope they have a dedicated driver.
They are done. Okay, so as regular listeners know, we break our show up into 3 topics. We pick the top news stories of the week and discuss them, dissect them, debate them, hopefully get some good debate in. Hopefully we'll get some tonight. And then this week, we're taking a bunch of different stories and putting them together into 3 different themes. So here's what we're going to be talking about. In the first segment, we're going to try to put the many high-profile clean tech company failures and the general energy market turmoil into context. Our second segment is going to be a bit local. We're going to talk about New York. We'll look at the staggering amount of activity here in the state on energy market reform and on solar development. A lot of exciting stuff happening. And in our third segment, we're going to look at where energy and climate fits into presidential politics. It's been a crazy race, and we'll talk about where it's fit into the campaign, the primary season thus far, and then what the candidates are likely to talk about going forward. So everyone ready to go?
Yeah.
Abengoa, SunEdison, and Next Step Living, NRG. A year or two ago, these companies were considered leaders in the energy transition. Today, they become case studies for poor business strategy or cautionary examples of the fickle nature of the public markets. Late last month, SunEdison, a top-tier global renewable energy developer, a company that was co-founded by Jigar in 2003, he left in 2008, filed for bankruptcy protection after a series of expensive, risky ventures. Just 9 months ago, execs were talking about SunEdison as the world's first renewable energy supermajor. Now it's getting stripped down to the very basics, and they're selling off all the projects they can. Abengoa, another behemoth global developer, also recently filed for bankruptcy protection. Like SunEdison, the company took on way too much debt to fuel growth, and they're suffering for it now in a big way. NRG, of course, recently fired its visionary CEO, David Crane, after investors soured on his plan to transform the power producer into a renewable energy powerhouse. Next Step Living, a Massachusetts efficiency and solar provider considered a model for the state's green jobs program, shut down its top-heavy business, crushing much of the $80 million that VCs had pumped into the company. These are just a few of the troubles that we've seen. But meanwhile, the macro trends for renewables, particularly renewable electricity, are just phenomenal. We're seeing record cost drops. We're seeing record investment flows. Pretty dramatic business innovation. Companies are figuring out deployment models. So what gives? I want to talk about a few different things here. One is to put these problems into context. I want to ask how they're impacting investment, both for project finance and in venture capital. And then I want to look at where the money is flowing, where the smart money is going in clean energy. So let's start off with a bang here. Jigar, let's talk about SunEdison. We've discussed this company so much on the podcast, and we've really hesitated to talk about them in the last couple of months because we wanted to wait to see what new would happen. So they filed for bankruptcy protection. You've been pretty critical of the management of this company, but I want to go beyond the current mistakes that we've talked about and give people some context on why the company was founded, what it was set up to do, and how it got to be the company that we know today that's kind of fallen on its face.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tall order to do in a podcast. But I think that the underlying premise of SunEdison was that people wanted to buy solar as a service, right? That before SunEdison was founded, Powerlight was really the largest solar developer, and they basically really forced their customers to pay cash for solar projects. And what you found was that a lot of these large corporations, it just didn't think that it was worth the precious capital dollars that they had to put them into a solar project when they could build a new store for that much, or upgrade a critical system. And so I think the innovation that SunEdison brought to the table was they said, look, you don't have to view this as critical infrastructure. You don't have to pay cash for it. You can basically just sign a long-term power purchase agreement, and we'll pay for it, and then we'll sell you power just like your utility sells you power. And I think that model has fundamentally revolutionized the solar industry in the U.S. and I think then spilled over into India and many other markets around the world. So, the legacy there is that I think that it's one of those really interesting equations, right? Basically, you got to get a customer to actually sign a contract, right? That's where the whole thing starts, and then you got to get someone to finance the contract at a reasonable interest rate. And if you find that the interest rates go up, then you end up losing money on the trade, right? So ultimately, the price that you pay for the cash flow stream that the customer signs up for is directly dependent on the interest rate that you're paying. I think, in SunEdison's case, they thought that they were, defying the laws of gravity with the yield co, and actually thought that they had structurally reduced the cost of capital. And it turns out that, that when they bought First Wind and they did another couple deals, that investors bought it, but then when they did more work and more analysts dug in, they realized, wait a second, they didn't defy the laws of gravity. They just hoodwinked us by paying too much for these assets, and then they corrected the stock.
Okay, so this is basically a construction company that turns into a company that's doing a lot of financial engineering, run by tech folks who are trying to push the company in a lot of different directions. At what point did that shift happen, and what are the lessons for other large companies looking to grow and ride the wave of this market?
So there's nothing wrong with financial engineering. I mean, I get the fact that a lot of folks have, read or watched The Big Short and now, feel like everyone's basically, playing with funny money with mortgages. But like when you look at what Solar City's done recently, where they've, gotten tax equity treatment from U.S. Bank, they've gotten asset-backed securitizations and debt raised through S&P, Kroll, and Moody's, rated paper. And then just recently this week, they sold their sponsor equity that they had left on their balance sheet to John Hancock. As long as all three of the parties understand what they're getting into and actually believe that they bought something that was valuable and are really doing their homework, then I think that is a sustainable model. It's not about the financial engineering. It's about when you go to Wall Street and raise a bunch of money for Terraform, which are really just a bunch of, Fidelity and Charles Schwab and some pension funds are just buying some stock. And then they leave it to you to go out and buy assets. And then you take that money and go overpay for something by 40%. Then they're not actually doing due diligence on that particular trade. They're doing due diligence on the stock and hopeful that you're going to manage it well. Whereas in Solar City's case, I'm sure that John Hancock looked at that paper 6 Ways to Sunday before they agreed to buy that paper, right? So at this point, if John Hancock makes money, it's because they did a good job underwriting, and if they lose money, it's because they did a bad job underwriting. But Solar City didn't cheat them or mislead them in any way, like SunEdison did with Terraform investors.
Chris, you've written an enormous number of SunEdison stories. What's the most interesting piece of this company's downfall that you've been writing about? Actually, let me rephrase this, because you wrote a story recently explaining why this was not indicative of the broader market, right? And I think a lot of people in the renewables industry are trying to tell that story, and they're saying, hey, look, this is a company that mismanaged itself, but there are a lot of other companies doing interesting stuff. And then you looked at what was happening broadly in the market, and you talked to a lot of people on the finance side and on the development side. How do you put this into context for readers?
Well, it seemed like a long time ago, over a year ago, there was some concern that SunEdison was paying too much for the projects project developments they were buying. And I think when they agreed to buy Vivint, it brought on a new level of risk that investors weren't willing to accept. And that made their borrowing costs that much higher. So it became a cascade that was ultimately unmanageable. But I don't think it's going to have any impact on the rest of the industry, except that it may slow down or increase borrowing costs for other developers temporarily.
Yeah, I guess the most immediate impact, right, is that the projects that it's selling off they're flooding the market with projects. I mean, in India, I think SunEdison has contracts for a quarter of the projects in that country. Is that right, Jigar?
Yeah, but I don't think that the flooding of the market matters. There's so much money out there that there's actually enough money to buy the projects. I think Chris is right, though, that the people who have money are now double-checking their homework and triple-checking things, and that is leading to slightly higher prices, or slightly higher, borrowing costs, lower prices. And that's, I think, fair, right? When a bubble pops, which is really what happened with the yield coast, then everyone reassesses whether they were doing their calculations correctly.
Yeah. I wouldn't be so quick to say that it will have no effect, because there's market sentiment, and that matters. Like if you think about a few years ago when Solar City was going public, that company, Solar Finance, benefited from the low cost and dropping cost of solar panels, which caused solar manufacturers to go bankrupt or out of business before Solar City was trying to go public. So its business was basically benefiting from not necessarily those bankruptcies, but from the low cost of solar panels. At the same time, when it was going public, it had a really hard time telling that story. And having solar in its name was a huge liability for it. And they
had to reprice their stock down twice, I think, before it went public, right?
And the investors the venture investors had to buy into the IPO to kind of prop it up, and it went out at a very low price, which the VCs left some money on the table. It ended up, but that was all market sentiment that didn't really have to do with fundamentals of the business itself. So,
but we're in a different place now, right? I mean, that was sentiment from the Solyndra backlash. I mean, this is like, we're going to put $45 billion out the door this year as an industry. Over 50% of all new electricity capacity additions in the U.S. are going to be solar. I mean, with solar plus wind, it'll be closer to 80%. At this stage, you're talking about Con Ed, Dominion, Southern Company, Duke. The vast majority of their new power plant investments are solar. I don't think market sentiment's going the wrong way. I think people are going to sharpen their pencil, but I think people are bullish on solar.
I was just going to say, so you don't think it's because the market doesn't understand this industry? You think it's because the decisions were made at the leadership level that didn't allow the market to, support this company?
You mean the downfall of SunEdison?
Yeah.
No, the downfall of SunEdison was that they violated the trust of investors. I mean, ultimately, investors said, you guys have a long track record of knowing what you're doing. We're going to give you a bunch of cash, based on the prospectus you gave us on the IPO. And then they use that money to overpay for projects by 30 or 40%, right? I mean, and they didn't have to overpay for projects, but that's what they did. Where Solar City, every time Solar City goes to market with an ABS, they got 14 people crawling into every orifice trying to figure out whether it's priced correctly, right? S&P's doing this and this person's doing that, et cetera. So it's not very easy for Solar City to pull a fast one on somebody because they've got all these people double checking the numbers.
And they're not buying projects from other developers. They're developing in-house.
Well, that's true, yeah.
Speaking of market sentiment, Yuliya, is solar a dirty word in the venture capital world? I mean, there's just not that much activity in clean tech. We have seen some interesting stuff in the battery storage space, in the software space, but there really isn't that much money going into hardware. And VCs are understandably skittish about the clean tech space. Would you characterize it that way?
So I think it's interesting because 2015 was a blockbuster year for venture capital overall, right? If at some point it was reasonable to say that a good venture capital year is $30 billion invested into startups in the US. Last year it was more than $70 billion, right? And VCs were putting money into lots of different things. Lots of, lots of companies and businesses that were crucial for our society, such as, fantasy football, and so you have all of that going on, and clean tech, in the meantime, is you have this limelight, and the skid is kind of in the corner, right, out of the limelight completely. So. The amount of money that went into clean tech overall shrank as a percentage and also declined year to year last year. And now, so clean tech wasn't getting much love in that period of time, and now the VC market is much more skittish overall.
I mean, help me understand what's going on here, because you do have successful stories in Tesla thus far. You have someone like Elon Musk who's trying to build a rocket company, build an electric vehicle company, and build a solar company, and by most accounts is doing a pretty darn good job at it thus far. You have people like Peter Thiel who criticize venture investors for not being bold enough, who said, we wanted flying cars, instead we got 140 characters. And he talks about investing in next generation nuclear, in space travel, in biotech, but we're not getting that. Why are we not getting that?
Math.
And what's that?
Math.
Yeah.
Just, it doesn't add up. So California, the teachers' retirement system invested some money into clean tech over the years, into funds, and co-invested into startups, and it puts out a report, and so in June 2015 they tallied up their investments, and they said that for every dollar they invested, they think they're holding 73 cents. And that's still mostly unrealized. And so I copied one of the, from that report, if I could read a sentence. Unlike most other sectors which have recovered since the recession, the cleantech sector continues to be lackluster. Staff believes there is potentially remaining value yet to be realized. So that's like a pep talk right there, right? Like we're gonna get that. You're right that there have been some successes, like great ones, like Tesla and Nest returned a lot of money to VCs, right? But on the whole, there have been so many bad stories. Like
from thin film solar
absolutely.
manufacturers, battery manufacturers, those technologies were supposed to be able to exit by now, and they aren't yet.
Well, I mean, Eric Westhoff's piece on Vinod Khosal's portfolio showed that he's had way more losers, and I don't think he's had a single, out of the ballpark winner. I think he's got a couple of deals where he's sort of at par or may have sold it for like 20% more, but yeah, and I think Bill Gates has had the same luck. I mean, they went together. Yeah, they laid off a bunch of people at Light Sail recently. Look, I mean, this is why I'm so anti this whole R&D push. It's not like, it's always good to put R&D to work. Like, I mean, no one's anti R&D dollars from the government, but this notion that that venture capitalists who have a 4 to 5 year cycle are going to find these new technologies in these really backward ass industries and force them to buy hundreds of millions of dollars of this stuff so that they can actually get exits. It's crazy, right? Tesla, if you look at what Tesla, SolarCity, and Nest have in common, they were able to bypass the old lethargic sort of companies and go directly to the consumer, right? I mean, they all basically said, look, we're going to meet consumer demand, and we're not going to ask permission from the utility companies. We're not asking permission from government authorities or all these other people. And that's, I mean, even Tesla, for instance, when they first put their, I forgot what size that screen is, but that 12-inch LED screen in their Tesla Model S.
Yeah, basically
that was illegal, right? I mean, it was literally illegal. The Department of Transportation was saying, that's a distraction. You can't put that in there. And they basically said, screw you, we're going to do it anyway. And then the Department of Transportation was so in love with Elon Musk, they're like, yeah, I guess you're right. We can do that anyway.
Well, I think that what you're saying about VCs not funding this kind of stuff, it's not unlikely. I mean, they have been for some time, right? 10 to 5 years ago,
with really
but they
bad
lost all the
returns
money.
Unless
right.
you're Nancy Fund that invested in everything that Elon touched.
And but I think that actually speaks to there's a little bit of a myth, I think, about venture capital in general, that these are the investors that take on huge risks to fund breakthrough technology, and that there is some of that. But if you look at the most highly valued private companies overall right now, Pinterest, Uber, Airbnb, okay, there is some technology there, but it's not like, an MIT professor will have dedicated her life to any of that, right?
Stripe is the same, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so what VCs are really looking for are companies that can get to customers quickly.
But this brings me to another point, right? So let's talk about Next Step Living. This is a company that was trying to show that it could grow at the scale that VCs wanted it to. They dumped $80 million into this company. They were chasing rebates very hard. When net metering was scaled back, when you saw rebates dry up, when ERA funds dried up, this is a company that could not scale at the rate that VCs wanted it to. And so when you look at a company like Uber or Airbnb or Lyft, these companies are spending gobs of money to try to beat their competitors, and they claim to be profitable, but that's questionable. And so it's hard for me to see how companies that are deploying projects like a Next Step Living can follow the path of an Uber and just spend their way to the top.
No, but
Is that a
next step
problem?
living is a little bit different, right? So when you look at Uber fundamentally was tapping into the black car market, right? They were basically saying people already get black cars. It's a wholly unsatisfying experience, and I can talk from experience, like getting dial 7 or dial 5 or dial 3 or whatever it is crazy. And, like opening up your phone and just hitting a button is so much more awesome. And, and so they already had a market, right? They expanded the market. They got more people to use black cars, and now like UberX. But the thing with energy efficiency is that they've never actually had an intrinsic market, right? I mean, outside of the over-subsidized market, energy efficiency has never been able to prove that people en masse actually wanted to spend $7,500 to tighten up their house, right? Now, the solar is different, right? I mean, that's why you have that great episode of South Park where, they were like doing Priuses, and they had that organization called Smug, and that's how solar works. It's great. You have a dinner party. You're like, look, I have a solar system. By inference, I'm saying you don't, so I'm cooler than you. But like, it's hard to say, like, look, those little painted over holes. That's where I sprayed in foam insulation. Like, my house is way more comfortable than yours, right?
Somehow I feel like a lot of people in this room would do that, though.
But the Nest thermostat's the same, right? Like, you go in and go like, what do you have? Oh, you have that ugly like Johnson Controls thermostat? I have this beautiful Nest thermostat, and look at my app on my phone. Isn't it awesome? Like, I mean, there's this whole thing, right, about like, and so the problem with Next Step Living was that it's just, like, at some point, like, logic can't get you there. There actually has to be real intrinsic consumer demand for the product that you're selling.
And they also had they also depended to scale and to go into other states. They had different rules in different states, different energy efficiency programs. Solar wasn't the same as energy efficiency, right? So, and these programs don't work the same way in every place. And I think the VCs, I think, really wanted to be like some of these tech companies, wanted this company to be like that. That if the idea was that if you grow revenue really quickly, then you will be super valuable. But in that case, first of all, it doesn't work in every case in tech, obviously, too. And it definitely didn't work for them.
Yeah. Katherine, I think we've tried to put this in a market context thus far. I want to put this in a political context. So Abengoa, NRG, Next Step Living, these are all companies that have touched ARA funds, that have gotten government support. And in 2012, if you had seen some of these companies struggle post-Solyndra, we would have seen a pretty dramatic response in Washington. And the response doesn't seem to be as intense this time around. I'm just curious what the storyline is politically.
Yeah, we haven't seen any blowback politically, and partly it's because the industry has come a long way. Thanks to the ARA funds, the industry is actually a lot further along than it was back then, and that's because we decided as a nation to invest. We came up with a lot of success stories. So yes, there's some failures, but that's sort of natural. I mean, there were way more successes from the stimulus and also from other policies like tax policy. But I think what we're seeing is there just has not been a real policy conversation in the political arena right now about clean energy yet. It hasn't happened except between Bernie and Hillary Clinton, and that's it. I mean, there hasn't been any discussion on the Republican side about anything meaningful on energy that I've heard. So that storyline and that meme hasn't come up. You know, I hear people who don't know anything about energy say, oh, I keep reading about these solar companies. But you can always say, look, this was an aberration. This is not what the industry. If you look at the industry, it's strong.
Yeah, and I mean, that seems what everybody across the industry has been saying that. And I think
But does there need to be a political
disciplined
response to energy efficiency? I mean,
Yeah.
it's an economic
Yeah.
thing. It makes sense economically if you can find the money up front to reduce your energy usage.
Well, I don't know. I think that there is a growing need for a political response from the energy efficiency industry's perspective. You have folks like Ark Levinson, who wrote a paper questioning whether California's building codes have supported energy efficiency. You have a lot of folks questioning the results we've seen in state-level programs. The modeling is very complex. We haven't been able to guarantee savings. There's a push for metered energy efficiency. And these are all very political conversations. We've historically relied on complicated models to tell us that weatherization works. And now all of a sudden people are questioning those results that we've been pushing for the last 30 years. And I think a lot of folks in the efficiency industry, for example, are defensive for that reason.
But I think there's a difference between politics and policy. I mean, those are all policy questions. So the issue is, yeah, you might have someone in the political sphere who has a goal, who wants a state to do X, and we'll talk about New York shortly, but it's the policies that you put into place that make that happen or not. And I think for efficiency, it's always been really tough. Like all these other things we're talking about are things that people really want, they desire. Park Mobile, man, that's like the best. But that's like a market that's there. All you got to do is put like an app. It's already created for you. It's something people need. Efficiency is so much harder to get at and try to get people to really access it. Unless, Nest can get to that. Something like a Nest could do it. But you have to, it's something else that people want, not the efficiency.
As long as you're not trying to change their behavior.
No, but even if you're trying to change their behavior, I just think that there is this conflagration of like technologies, right? I mean, clearly appliance efficiency standards have worked great. George W. Bush's ban on incandescent light bulbs has worked fantastic. So you've got some stuff there, which I think has gone really well. I think some of this really complex stuff around building codes, there's been a lot of admissions that the baselining was incorrect. And now, they're going back in to try to fix it, and Matt Golden's done a lot of good work there, and NYSERDA's listening there and trying to figure out how we change our policies to reflect, like what the data is showing. But I do think that this notion that on all these curves for climate change, that we're going to just magically use 30% less electricity through energy efficiency. I mean, Amory Lovins has been trying to say that since 1975, and that has not worked.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to ask the reporters is, are you seeing investors change their behavior based on a lot of these climate reports? So based on what globally leaders are doing on climate, on setting prices on carbon, whether or not we do that, are you seeing investment shifting globally as a result of that in clean tech?
I can't say I've seen it in the marketplace. If you look at stock prices, solar stocks are faring much worse than even coal stocks are right now in the U.S. But there is, this underlying demand that will support increased investment, and I think there is a bit of a disconnect between what investors see in the growth of the market and the stock prices we're looking at now.
I mean, you clearly see a lot of Wall Street banks putting billions of dollars into this industry, and I think they would be doing that absent any sort of international climate deal. What you do see that's changing, in my opinion, is now you've got the development banks, all the international financial institutions saying, we're not going to finance coal plants anymore. We're going to put big funds together to develop off-grid solar, off-grid lighting systems. And that really is a structural shift in the way that a lot of the international development banks have operated. My guess is that it hasn't yet had a huge impact on what, say, the project investors are doing, but there has been an impact thus far. And then, of course, the divestment movement is starting to have an impact as well, although not totally material yet.
And utilities are preparing for the Clean Power Plan, whether or not it gets overturned by the Supreme Court. It's something that all utilities feel like is a risk for them, so they cannot continue to invest in new coal, for instance, and are gradually shifting to more gas, which is an economic replacement anyway because of shale gas.
And I remember that 10 years ago, right? There were a lot of investors interested in clean tech, and VCs. I feel like a little bit of maybe other investors too, like lemmings, right? Like they need someone to be very vocal, and it shouldn't be the politician or government in Germany. It should be another big investor. And then they pay attention. So they were paying a lot of attention to climate discussions, to government policy at a certain time. But after they lost a lot of money, and these big investors are not talking about this anymore, they're not
well,
listening. They're not
John
even
Doerr
interested
cried
anymore.
on stage, right? At
Oh,
TED.
yeah.
And now he's out from Kleiner Perkins, right? So, look, I think the thing that peeves me about this whole thing is that we keep talking about companies, like the company part matters here, right? I mean, when you look at clean
It does
tech,
matter.
I don't think it does. I mean, the vast majority of the money going into wind and solar is going to project finance, right? So when you look at Bloomberg New Energy Finance's data, it's like 75 to 80% of all of that capital is going to project finance. And I can tell you for a fact that like Wells Fargo Bank like is losing their shirts on the fracking industry right now. They're not losing a single dollar on all of the projects that they've invested in for SunEdison.
Yeah, but when a company like SunEdison that controls a large a large number of projects blows up, that's a big deal. We should be focusing on the health of these companies.
Right, but you asked about following the money, right? And my point is that when you talk to pension funds, when you talk to insurance companies, when you talk to other people who don't actually talk a lot, they don't have a lot of press releases and other stuff, they're really happy with their investments. They're putting in billions of dollars of additional capital this year than they did last year. Just 4 years ago, we were talking about how there was a natural barrier of $6 billion total for the solar and wind industry of tax equity. We've blown through that such that the solar industry alone will be using $15 billion of tax equity this year. Where did that come from? All sorts of places that no one's reported on, but there's a lot of like high net worth individuals, corporations, others that are putting money out the door on tax credits that they were investing in low income housing or historical tax credits or other types of tax credits. They've shifted over to renewables, and that's moving up and to the right without any like sort of end in sight, right? And so that money is going in, and now you've got all these crowdfunding sites where they're trying to get millennials and other folks to invest their retirements into very simple sort of debt instruments making 6-7% returns, which is far better than Prudential's annuities are paying these days. And so I think that's a huge good news story. It's just they're not the people on CNBC talking about what they're investing in.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to end on, which puts a lot of this into context. And I guess I'll ask, aside from the emotional distress I'm sure it's caused you, like, does SunEdison's failure matter that much then, given what you just said?
Well, so I mean, I think it matters a lot, but for an entirely different esoteric reason that I don't think the reporters have sort of realized, which is that, like, so if you're somebody that busted your butt and got $50 to $60 million worth of solar and wind projects developed and off the ground and built, your exit doesn't exist now because SunEdison's gone. Right? The only exit that you had was Terraform. There's no place to go. Like, I mean, you'd hire Marathon Capital and you'd say, hey, why don't you sell this to XYZ? But a lot of those buyers want to buy a minimum of $200 or $300 million worth of assets. They don't want to bother because how many fees can Marathon possibly make on a $50 million sale? So if you're sitting there with a sub-scale portfolio of solar and wind assets, it's very hard to figure out who's going to go and monetize that for you right now. And SunEdison was the only player in the market that was monetizing those assets for people. And so you see a lot of folks stuck with term sheets that are worthless right now in New Jersey and other places that are looking for exits that can't find them. So,
but some of the other yield companies are operating just fine. If you look,
but they're not buying other people's assets.
No,
so 8.3,
no, internally,
NextEra.
Right.
I mean, that's what I'm just saying. The question was whether SunEdison's left a hole in the market, and they have. I mean, I think for a lot of these smaller players who had small regional real estate investors who invested in the projects, now 5 years has gone by, they really want an exit, and there's no one to exit to. There's nobody out there that's put up their shingle saying we want to buy those assets.
Okay, let's talk about New York. So the last time we were here, we were talking about the embryonic phase of New York's plan to remake its electricity sector, reforming the energy vision, which I'm sure everyone here is very, very familiar with, to turn this state into a renewable energy, a distributed energy paradise, a free market paradise for these technologies. So there's a lot more to talk about 2 years later. I think we still are in this embryonic phase. Clearly, this is going to be a long-term shift. There are some real ideas on the table now about rate design, about market control. We've got some pilot projects now in the works to prove out some concepts. But everyone, I think, realizes how complex this process really is, and I want to talk about some of that complexity. So at the same time, New York is investing in battery R&D. Solar City is still building out its manufacturing plant. We heard about community solar and community choice aggregation expanding here. We've got this compromise on net metering in the works. What does all this add up to here in New York? Someone just ran out of the door.
They were chugging because of the
They're
Sun
chugging.
Edison.
Yeah, it was too much Sun Edison talk.
So what does all this add up to? Katherine, what is your opinion on how the REV process has gone thus far? You've been an active participant.
Yes.
You've proposed some ideas.
Yeah.
There are so many ideas on the table. 2 years on, how would you characterize where we're at?
Yeah, so there are over 200 stakeholders. I think what this shows is that if you build it or start to build it, they will come. There are lots and lots of innovators looking at what they can do, proposing new ideas, trying to make sure that the process is transparent. I mean, the really good news is that there have been lots of filings, not lots of responses. I feel like I've written a lot of those for people, but what it's done is it's created a lot of energy around how do we think about things differently, and it's really moved all of us to think about how do utilities actually make a revenue when you have third parties coming in and offering other opportunities to consumers. How do consumers participate? How does then the regulator look at the utility, and how are they going to allow them to recoup their investments, or what is their investment going to really be? So I think while we're looking now pretty far down the road as to like how things are going to spin out, there's still a lot of unanswered questions, and I think that's healthy. I think it means that we're talking about things that we hadn't before. Things had kind of stagnated a little bit, and now we're looking beyond net metering. Like, let's think about what are some other ways we can calculate the value of everything, not just solar. But how do we kind of change the whole paradigm? And it isn't something you can do overnight. I think New York is doing it in a way that's really interesting and transparent in a lot of ways. I think there's going to be a lot of data out there we can use to try to figure out, what's going on and how do we resolve the third-party utility consumer issues. We still have a ways to go.
Yeah. Chris, you've been following the REV process, right? A little bit?
Sure.
We were talking about the locational pricing and that being an important transition for net metering as part of this discussion about rate design within the REV process. Is that something that you're covering a lot? And
Well, I'd like to cover it more, but my editors aren't that interested.
I think everybody who is interested in this subject is in this room right now.
Yes. So let me say that these are really interesting ideas that are being proposed in New York. And finally, just a month ago, we got an understanding through the compromise between the solar industry and Con Edison about how this sort of local pricing for distributed resources is going to work. And it's going to be set, occasionally every other year, you get a price for this region. That's where we want to put resources to reduce strain on the grid in, say, Manhattan. And the idea is that, utilities have to share that information with potential developers. We don't know how exactly that's going to work yet, but at least they're at the same table together talking, and we're getting a clearer picture of how it might work. I just worry that it's overcomplicating the issue, and that it's all going to collapse at some point.
Every time I have a discussion about REV with someone, I think that's the most common phrase. We don't know exactly how it's going to work yet, but it's going to be really great when it does.
It's going to be cool.
Jigar, what concrete do you feel like we've figured out as part of the REV process? How do you think that the process has gone thus far?
Well, I certainly think that there was a tremendous amount of excitement, and then that's sort of the 200 people that are actively part of the process. I think that, the number of people who've actually gotten contracts to do stuff is pretty low. The battery guys haven't really been able to crack into New York very successfully. I think the BQDM project, which is the Brooklyn sort of substation in Brownsville, you know, is the poster child for REV. It's a $1.2 billion upgrade, and you know, Con Ed with the Public Service Commission thinks that they should be able to avoid that transmission and distribution substation upgrade for about $200 million. Con Ed's put out less than $40 million, I think, out the door. And all the sort of startup companies, they haven't given any contracts to like NextEra or AES or Microsoft or others who've
But
all.
those are coming. And through
Well, maybe. And
through the microgrid project that they're doing.
well, so that's what saved their ass was, I think, the microgrid projects, which, you know, Micah was running or is running, you know, really has brought a lot of excitement back to the process, and a lot of folks got their $100,000 grants to do their feasibility studies, and now the next stage is being adjudicated, and folks are really excited about that. But I definitely think that, you know, there's going to be a moment of truth in August or September around BQDM, and if Con Ed comes back and says we tried our best, but we couldn't find anybody competent enough to actually solve this problem, then Audrey's going to have a pickle on her hands, because Audrey's going to have to be like, well, am I going to force you to do it anyway because I know it's possible? Or am I going to have to actually like sit there and go, you know, like Con Ed threatening that people are going to go into rolling blackouts there is something I have to take seriously.
Yeah, but that's the risk, right? And we were talking about California, and you were saying that the CPUC and the CEC's warning that we were going to have blackouts because of the gas leak at Aliso Canyon. You said that was BS, and that we do have the demand side management tools in place to make up for that gap. So now what you're saying is in New York that we might not be able to, you know, fill in.
No, I know that we can. I mean, like, so what Southern California Edison did, which I thought was good, was they did this RFO and provided contracts to people like STEM and, you know, Advanced Microsystems and, you know, Evaporacool and Ice Energy and others to basically say you are not responsible for delivering, you know, 40 megawatts, 50 megawatts worth of load and responding to our signals in such a way.
Yeah, and SCE procured 5 times more than it was expected to.
Right, which is great, right? And now they're, because I think a lot of the pressure we put on them and a lot of other people put on them, they're trying to accelerate those contracts in the last 2 weeks, which is interesting. So we'll see whether that happens. But Con Ed never actually followed that process. And so now Con Ed's trying to backfill. And, you know, they're telling me that maybe in the next 4 to 8 weeks, they'll actually put out an RFP that looks like Southern California Edison's. But look, I mean, the thing is, if you want this process to work, right, you actually have to be able to meet the very serious reliability requirements of the utility with very serious solutions from the cleantech community. And those serious solutions can't be provided by undercapitalized startup companies that have, you know, like, you know, 3 employees. They have to be, you know, largely anchored by folks who have NextEra-like balance sheets, AES-like balance sheets, et cetera, with some of these other startup companies mixed into the middle. And we'll see. I mean, I think Con Ed, through, you know, just deer in the headlights and through, you know, other sort of issues, has been very slow to deliver that. And National Grid's done a much better job in Albany, but then that's a really small project up there.
It's in their interest to succeed, though.
Whose?
Con Ed's and
I don't
National
know
Grid's.
that they think that. My sense is that, you know, if you get John out over a, you know, stiff drink, not talking about Sun Edison, I think he's going to say, I'd rather have the $1.2 billion of rate base. And it's, you know, I think this is something where I don't think REV is complex. I think REV is just a cultural change where, you know, in 2004, we were all talking about ballot initiatives banning gay marriage. And now, you know, the Supreme Court's actually said that gay marriage is like legal across the land. I mean, such a huge shift in such a short amount of time. I think REV is sort of like saying to the utility company, you actually should grow up and be a real for-profit company. You should actually try to provide better services to your customers and make money doing that, as opposed to relying on the regulatory regime to provide rate-based returns. And I think the utilities are going, we honestly don't know what you just said.
No more monopoly diapers for you.
Right? So it'll be an interesting fight.
So this is a general question from someone out in the audience. What does a successful REV demo look like then? And I know that there have been a variety of programs that have been proposed, some as simple as like, you know, a platform for helping people connect with contractors and figure out their energy use, and then we have this demand-side management program to offset a substation investment. What would be successful in your eyes? Like, do you have?
Well, I mean, like, just to repeating what I just said, I mean, I think, like, to the sort of Business Week and Wall Street Journal reader, I think it's basically saying these substations cost $1 billion to upgrade. We could actually do it for $200 million using all of the clean tech technologies that have been created over the last 15 years. Let's give them a shot, right? And those guys successfully getting a shot and offsetting $1 billion of investment, that's pretty obvious that that's REV, and that wouldn't have happened without REV. I think all the micro stuff in terms of like the distribution level, data transfers and third parties coming in and figuring out how to like make micro changes by controlling people's refrigerators or water heaters or demand response or load control. I think that stuff's esoteric and weird, and I'm not sure a lot of folks get it yet. DERs and some of that stuff. But I think people get the fact that this stuff costs a crap load of money to do it the same way you did in the 1970s. There's a whole bunch of technologies that have been invented the last 10 years. You should give them a shot, and they're like, 1/10 of the cost of doing stuff 1970s style.
Yeah. And to me, I'm sorry, it means that, if you make investments in renewable energy, in battery systems, in distributed energy resources, then you can recoup that investment by selling some portion of that asset back to the utility. And that's the thing that I think New York is struggling to kind of come up with the solution to. How to monetize that distributed resource. And I hope they do it.
Yeah, and my vision of success would be that we don't have death by pilot. So it's not just BQDM.
And that's the big
and
risk.
That's,
Yeah,
look, we did it.
absolutely.
It's great. No, what you want to have is something where you figured out how you're going to monetize all of this, figure out the business model, and then replicate it. And I think one of the best ways to do that first is going to be the munis. I mean, the munis are able to do it. They've got NIPA that's funded. They can do this community choice aggregation and other interesting things where it's self-contained and they can replicate. But I think the main thing is, like, we have to be able to do more than one project.
One of the things that will be interesting to watch long term is what other states do or other utilities do incrementally while New York goes through this comprehensive process. So I was at the Energy Storage Association conference last week or a couple weeks ago and talking to Duke. And Duke is saying, okay, we've got all these pilot projects in our unregulated arm. We're trying to figure out a way to apply this to our regulated business. And we think that we can convince regulators to help us pay for storage projects for T&D deferral, right? And we're essentially doing the same thing that Con Edison's trying to do through REV, and you have utilities that are pursuing this in different avenues. And so as REV goes through this as New York goes through this long REV process, other utilities will be doing the same thing, but just incrementally or one-off projects, and it will be interesting to see what that adds up to if it's greater than what REV has accomplished over the next few years. So that's what I'm kind of keeping my eyes on.
Yeah, and Duke's different because they have generation. They can offset generation assets, but they can't here.
To Jigar's point about some of these companies having to be reliable to work with utilities, I remember that a long time ago, I think one of the California utilities, I don't remember whether it was PG&E or SoCal Energy, they signed a PPA with a solar space company. Do you know what happened?
PG&E, yeah.
What happened
satellite?
to that? Yeah, like the solar was collected somewhere up there, and then it's gonna.
Oh, that's crazy. I mean, like, it works, and the Japanese are like obsessed by this idea, and it works, but it's just like, I mean, it's really expensive.
But the utilities were signing these, right? Like they needed to sign.
They were kind of signing them.
But
Right,
the
but they
regulators
didn't.
didn't approve it, right?
No, well, they were required to hit a certain number of
Right,
megawatts.
exactly.
And so they said, well, let's sign up everything in the kitchen sink. And that was when they were signing deals at 17 cents a kilowatt hour. So I think as soon as the cost of solar PV flat plate went down, they like did everything they can to make sure that those contracts were not renewed or extended or, assisted in any way.
Screw REV, screw community choice aggregation, go with space-based solar power in New York. All right, who wants to make America great again? Let's talk about politics to wrap up the show.
You got to give them something to believe in.
Yeah, that's right. It's been, difficult to find the words to describe this presidential primary season. So let's talk about it in terms that we know: energy and climate. How have energy and environmental issues been framed in the race thus far compared to past races? That's what I want to figure out. What are the candidates specifically saying? Now that we're looking at a very likely Clinton-Trump general election, I want to talk about those two candidates, what they've discussed in the past, what they've proposed, and what a White House under either of those folks would do for clean energy and energy in general. And then maybe we can talk about Sanders, who's obviously still in the race, and Kasich and Cruz, who have talked about energy and climate in various ways. Chris, I guess I'll turn to you. What is the most substantive thing you've heard on energy in this primary season?
Dig deep, man.
That's a trick. I think that's a trick question.
Yeah, climate change is not real and it's not man-made.
Yeah, we had global cooling in the 70s, so global warming concerns are unfounded. That's what Ted Cruz said. No, but any policy proposals out there that you think are particularly interesting? Hillary Clinton has been talking about solar a lot.
I think Clinton is supporting what Obama has already started with the Clean Power Plan. I think you'd probably see a reversal of that under Trump, but it's not clear. I just can't get a read on him yet at this point.
Yeah.
You and everyone else.
Yeah.
Hey, he's y'all's.
Oh, I see how it is.
My fear is that they won't. They haven't had a substantive conversation yet. And when we head into the general, I want them to talk about FERC, and I'm guessing they probably won't. But I would love for them to actually dig into energy policy. Clinton has been talking about wanting to have us be the next, superpower on clean energy for the 21st century and installing rooftop solar. And Sanders has always been very, very forward-thinking in the Senate on clean energy. So those two folks live and breathe it and talk about it all the time, but we haven't had any kind of policy conversation on energy at all.
Yeah, I don't think that's a problem with the candidates. On the Democratic side, both Clinton and Sanders have put together pretty comprehensive plans to support renewable energy and to address climate change, but nobody in the debates asks them about it. You very rarely have voters or the debate moderators asking about it, and that's a problem in the way the media handles the issue, not with the candidates themselves.
I think it's striking how American Petroleum Institute is, advertising heavily on this, I'm an energy voter stuff, and they've
been doing that for the last, 5
No, but
years,
in the last 6 to 8 months, they basically stopped fighting solar and wind, and now said, well, solar and wind are awesome, and it's part of all of the above, because I think they've realized that it's actually better to embrace us than to fight us. So I think that's kind of cool. Look, I think that the challenge with both of these candidates is that they have a really hard time with their vision around this. I think Hillary Clinton had a great fundraiser at Lyndon Reeves' house and raised a crap load of money from the solar industry, and was very articulate about all of these policy issues. And I think really has a lot of great detailed knowledge in this space. But when it comes to sort of the broad political themes, her big gaffe in the coal miners, the big gaffe with Trump on the other side, where he's like, I want to put those miners back to work. The bottom line is that those coal miners are digging something out of the ground that kills people, right? And we've determined as a country that we no longer want to kill people by burning coal, right? And this is part of the Clean Power Plan. It's part of the mining safety work that's been done on the Obama administration. It's part of all these things. And so, I think that we're at a stage right now where I care about those coal miners' families as much as anyone, but to suggest for a moment that putting them back to work is actually how we solve that problem is ridiculous. And I think that the other part of this is trying to figure out, how America leads from a technology point of view. And I think that's where Clinton has had a tough time articulating to the general public that these are all American homegrown technologies. This notion that that solar or wind were scaled up by the German program or the Japanese program or the Chinese program is one thing, but all of the fundamental patents for solar and wind and some of the other things all came out of the United States, right? A lot of the fundamental technologies have all come out of the U.S. This is a U.S. homegrown technology coming back to the country to be deployed at $1 trillion scale. And when you think about like a lot of these mayors, which is where I think Bernie Sanders is really screwed up. I mean, given the fact that he used to be the mayor of Burlington, I think he could talk very, sort of wax poetically about how mayors have a lot of power, and that mayors really do control whether solar goes on schools, or whether energy efficiency is implemented at scale, or whether a lot of their buses are converted to CNG or to electric buses, or whether their gas.
But we're not at the point in the campaign where people should be talking about the issues in that detailed of a way.
I think
right?
Bernie may
get
have
the sense
actually
that
won the nomination if he was able to
Sanders,
talk about this.
If you sat down with them, they would be open to that type of messaging. And because Clinton doesn't talk about these being homegrown technologies, that's not her issue. That's an issue with politicians across the board who are supportive of this stuff. I think from your perspective, a lot of them have failed in the way they message around this. But I think she's done a pretty damn good job thus far in the campaign. I mean, she's talked about it in that one gaffe that you mentioned in coal country.
She's
she walked back a
supportive.
bit, but when you listen to the full context of what she said, she was talking about the incredible job growth in this industry, transitioning local communities to somehow get clean energy jobs to replace these coal jobs, which is a little bit of a mushy argument when you dig into it. But
I
she
have
was
very
making
high standards, right? And I don't apologize for that. When you think about what happened in the 2008 election cycle, the entire election cycle was about drilling and about fracking and how it's going to change our entire world. That is where we are on solar and wind. I mean, I just think that, to suggest for a moment that the fact that over the next 5 years, even the EIA, who I hate, is saying
Really?
that 80% of all new capacity additions are going to come from solar and wind, that's extraordinary. The fact that not even 1% of Democrats actually know this is crazy. And the fact that 1 out of every 80 jobs since the financial crisis has been created in the solar industry, which is higher than the number of people that have been added to the home builder industry, which traditionally has been the driving engine of blue collar growth. I mean, I just think that it's nuts to me. When you think about, forget about renewable energy and climate change and all that stuff. I mean, just fundamental income inequality, we pay an average of $21 an hour. These are the jobs that people want, not only because they're going to get a job this week, but because it's actually a career that they can actually feed their family on and send their kids to college based on, right? I mean, these are the kinds of things that we're doing. There's 88 counties across the United States who have so much solar and wind, these are all rural counties, that we've increased their property taxes by 20%. That's money that's going to go into new roads, new schools, new services from those counties. These are counties that, in the 1980s, were booming and now have been written off because they're so rural that they have nothing going on, right? I mean, we've brought something back. These guys care deeply about keeping young people in their community so that when they graduate from college, they just don't leave and never come back, right? That's what we're doing, and I just think that that Clinton hasn't figured out how to weave that story into her stump speech.
I don't think anybody has, though.
Yeah, I
don't
think it's on us to ask those questions, because when it's head to head in the general election, I think it's up to us to ask them those, because we need for them to be able to respond either side as to what they're going to do and what they know. And I know she's prepared on this. She hasn't been
I know
asked.
she's prepared on it. She definitely talked about it and talks about it on fundraisers and all that stuff. She's super smart on these issues. But I mean, look, I'm selfish. I want to get all the free publicity. I want her to use it on the stump speech. I want, folks to talk about it on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News.
So how many jobs are in the solar sector versus how many are in the oil and gas?
Well, so the oil and gas sector is now net negative compared to its employment in 2009.
Okay,
so
but
they've
the total.
shed all of the jobs that they added, since in the last 8 years. So that's where it is. The solar industry's added about 160,000 jobs. The home builders have added about 100,000 jobs, right? And so look, the oil and gas industry did generate a lot of temporary jobs, but they also create a lot of temporary and actually permanent now liabilities, right? And you look at North Dakota, now that everyone's left, they've got permanent road damage they have to fix. They've got all this infrastructure that's been ruined that they didn't get paid enough to go out and fix, right? Now they have to actually go raise people's taxes to fix it. So I don't know that they thought it was a net positive.
I just wonder how much people care on both sides, sort of the pro fossil fuel versus, because a lot of times the policy takes from one and gives to another in a way, right? And so
Well, I wish that was true, but that's not true, right? Every time we pass an energy act, we have to pay off the senators with $20 billion of new tax breaks for oil and gas, so we can get $2 billion for ourselves, right?
Well, Yuliya, you bring up a really good point, because a lot of this election is going to be focused on bringing jobs back here. And you have Donald Trump, who's been very critical of international trade deals, who claims that he's going to bring jobs back to coal country, back to steel workers, back to the Rust Belt. And God knows how he's going to do it, but that's why a lot of folks who might be independent or who might be blue-collar Democrats are interested in someone like Trump. And I think that's where energy will come into play. I think that a candidate like Trump will try to put people like Clinton on the defensive, or the renewable energy industry on the defensive, and saying, like, you're trying to strip jobs away, and really appeal to the voters that are interested in a candidate
because
like
there are
Trump.
so many, right? It's one thing when you're saying that, you know, fossil fuels don't deserve, we shouldn't drill, or we shouldn't, like, you know, Bernie's plan shuts down almost everything,
yeah,
right?
nuclear and natural
it's like
gas.
Everything
right, yeah.
is we're just gonna candles and all that. But
Yeah. How are you
We
going to
do
get
have
electricity?
space solar
Well, you know,
power.
I'm going to make this policy, and yada yada yada, it'll be fine.
But the thing is that when people are employed in these industries, and the candidate says we're gonna get rid of these industries, it's a very direct effect on your life, versus a lot of what we're talking about on the side of clean energy. You know, the benefits are kind of removed a little bit. They're not like on your skin. They're not touching you. And so I remember talking at one point with an executive at a big environmental nonprofit, who was very kind of annoyed by the fact that people don't care as much as they should about climate change and environment and all that. And he said that he basically wished for like a tsunami to hit New York, and at that point, people will start caring.
Well, that kind of
We had
happened.
Sandy.
I mean,
And that
you know,
helped.
Yeah.
Katherine, any other thoughts on the substance of what Clinton's been talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think we haven't heard the beginning of it, really. I mean, she has plans for when we talk about coal jobs, those are not people who are actually working right now. I mean, a lot of my family's in Appalachia. Those people aren't working at all. So if somebody can come in and show some hope, not like, oh, hey, let's go back into the coal mines, but hey, here's something in solar you can learn how to install rooftop solar. You all own homes because you've had homes forever because your life used to be good. So you can put it on your own home too. I think once we start getting specific, that will really help. I just hope we get that. I hope we get that. I hope we get more nuanced discussion. So far, it has not been at all.
do you think she has to come out for a carbon tax?
No. No, I don't think so.
No.
Why would she? Who's going to ask her that question?
Sounds
I
like
think the
not a
carbon
good
I don't
tax
idea.
see that even
become-
coming up.
I think
No.
the carbon tax has become the litmus test from the McKibbins, right? I mean, ultimately, it's like, whether it's
Yeah, but-
Glenn Hubbard from from George Bush's administration, like the Republicans, like Bob Inglis, et cetera, have been pushing the carbon tax. I mean, basically, your answer to that question ends up telegraphing where you are.
But she's a pragmatist, right?
Yeah, that's. Yeah, I don't
Well,
think-
she was a pragmatist until Bernie Sanders pushed her.
I don't think, the Enviros have had an important influence on the primary campaign, but I don't think they'll have as much influence during the general election. And there's no one during the debates is going to even ask that question. I just
Tom
don't see it
Steyer's
coming
gonna
up. I
put
don't
all
think
this
she's going to
money
have to
in,
defend
and
that position.
Jay Fason's putting $175 million to work. I mean, you're saying that none of these guys are going to break through? I mean, Jimmy Kimmel went on a rant yesterday.
Yeah, I saw that.
Against Sarah Palin.
Well, sure, and she can propose it, but it doesn't mean it's going to go anywhere.
It's so cynical.
We're
Reporter.
cynical. As crazy as it sounds, though, I think that we're better off having Trump in the running than we were Cruz, because we've talked about this. Cruz wants to go to Washington and shut down everything he can. And with Trump, we just don't know. I mean, he's had positions all across the map. And he'll just completely mismanage it. He won't shut it down.
Well, we do know that he's not competent to shut it down. I mean, there are layers of bureaucracy. I mean, it takes years to shut stuff down. Like, Cruz actually has a playbook by which to break
absolutely,
through those
right.
things.
And I think that's a
Trump
lot
doesn't even know
scarier.
where to look for it.
So, wow, we're already almost out of time. I had a bunch of questions here. Many of them were kind of unrelated to the topic, so I apologize for not getting to a lot of the questions. But we do like to end this show off by telling our listeners something they may not know. An anecdote from our daily work lives, our reporting, a statistic. And I'll turn to Katherine for her story.
You know, there are people who have drinking games about who you're going to ask first.
Yeah, you know, we had listeners
I don't know if you know this,
tally.
but like I'm almost always ask first, which I'm totally fine.
You're my favorite.
I knew that.
I'm kidding.
That's right. Happy Mother's Day, Katherine.
We've got it. Thank you. So as I was taking the train up from DC this morning, buried on page A16 of the Washington Post was an article about a World Bank report that just came out called High and Dry, Climate Change, Water, and the Economy. And it's pretty significant because it showed how much GDP could go up as a result of water shortage, from evaporation from heat because of climate change, agricultural use that's going up because of increased population, inefficient use of our infrastructure and our system. And what this said to me, because we were coming up here to talk about investment and about clean tech, was that there's this great opportunity out there for technologies that can help us in water efficiency and water and agriculture technologies that all also have to do with energy. So everybody should look at that.
Chris?
Good point. And everyone here knows that Jigar Shah is the father of the solar PPA, the solar lease model.
And the father of a new son.
And probably and probably now the grandfather of it, because there have been so many copycats doing the same thing, even going to other models, even fuel cells, turbines, gas turbines. I met the CEO of a company yesterday who is taking the PPA to a totally different direction, but on the same lines of what you just mentioned. And instead of a power purchase agreement, it's a produce purchase agreement where they build greenhouses in suburban, urban areas, paid for by the long-term contracts they sign to sell vegetables to local grocers. And I think that is awesome.
At a discount from California produce.
Yes, and with less water use, less energy.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yuliya?
So I've been pretty pessimistic, right, about like VCs and all that. But I thought it's interesting that like one of the hottest new venture firms in Silicon Valley is actually interested in grid startups and electric grid startups and energy efficiency. Officially, like that's one of their things. So it's Joe Lonsdale's 8 VC or 8 partners. So he's the Silicon Valley kind of whiz who co-founded Palantir and had a fund called Formation 8 that then split up into Formation Group and 8. He kept the 8. So this fund is raising money really quickly, like for venture funds. You know, he in a couple months he raised $300 million, and he has this whole social impact thing going on, and mentioned specifically grid. And on top of that, there was a fund raised last year by Ev Williams, who is a co-founder of Twitter and the CEO of Medium. And he raised $123,456 $789 for the fund, Silicon Valley. And,
that's really funny.
And as the square root of that is 1.1111. They kept telling everyone something. I don't know, but
And I thought I was like wonky.
So that's also a social impact fund, and they've actually invested in solar finance and in a grid company, Bala, I think. So there is some Silicon Valley idealism that clean tech can still tap, I think.
Well, so that's Obvious Ventures, right? And
Obvious
our friend
Ventures, yes.
Andrew Beebe works there.
Yep,
Yeah,
that's right.
So-
Yeah,
Suntech,
yeah.
right?
I think I also saw in the Wall Street Journal yesterday that because ping pong table sales are lagging, that's an indication that the clean tech, or not, that the venture bubble is popping and stuff like that.
They track very closely. They had a whole graph.
And pretty soon it's going to be Batman. But
Jigar, what do you got?
so my number is 48 million, right? So that's the amount of money that the Obama administration just allocated to relocate folks in a town in Louisiana that's on basically a sandbar. And they've been there for years. I think they relocated there based on the Trail of Tears, generations ago. And so there's 60 people that live there. And they're saying it's going to be very difficult because you have 48 million bucks. Not everyone has to move. They have to find another town in Louisiana that actually wants these people and, wants to integrate them and has jobs for them. And it just seems like, like just talking about it, it's only 60 people. I mean, like that level of, sort of elevation is commonplace in the Netherlands or in the low-lying areas of Bangladesh. And we're spending $48 million on 60 people. So it's gonna get pretty expensive to relocate people because of climate change.
Okay, I don't want to end on a downer. So I was, trolling around on Twitter this morning, and a friend sent me a link to a great new band that you all should know about. It's called Raptor Command, and it is a power metal band devoted to Elon Musk. All the songs that they play are all about the genius of Elon Musk. So here's their mission. I wrote it down. To raise awareness of and promote Elon Musk's futurist ideas and visions for the future of humanity through the medium of heavy metal music and subculture. And their first single is called Elon Champion for Humanity. It's a great song. Check it out on Spotify. And I think they have a lot more coming out.
You saw the test of the Model S that or Model X that they put into biomediation mode or whatever, and they had all this pollution in this bubble, and they put the car in there, they turned it on, and it basically took all the pollution out of the car in like 80 seconds.
No, I didn't see that.
And so they've got this mode that you can it's called
a filtration system?
It's the bioweapon mode, right? And they have so if there's a bioweapon that's let off around it, and it was Larry Page's idea.
Yeah.
And I guess it works, and now it's a feature that people in India and China really want because it's so polluted there that it takes out the pollution from the car.
Well, I do know they have ludicrous mode, so I damn well hope that Raptor Command is part of ludicrous mode. Okay, well, that's going to wrap up the show. Thank you all so much for coming. We had a great time. For those listening back home, you can get all our back episodes at greentechmedia.com/podcast. You can find us on iTunes, on SoundCloud, on Stitcher, on any podcast app of your choice. Thank you so much to all the organizations that put together this Clean Energy Connections event. We really appreciate you inviting us here. We love this place, and we love all of you for coming to check us out. So have a good night, everyone. With the Energy Gang, I'm Stephen Lacey, and we'll catch you next week.